This item suits you. Hurry up, pack your things, and leave.
Okay, let's see how your whole system works when I walk out of this room. You bastard!
Under the cold flicker of the LED panels, Darren Locke cleared his throat like he was about to deliver a historic announcement. Instead, he pointed straight at me. Benson Cole is no longer aligned with the new generation of leadership, he declared, savoring each syllable as if he were handing out a promotion instead of a termination. The room froze. 20 pairs of eyes turned toward me, expecting outrage, denial, maybe even a plea. But all I felt was a sharp, hollow jolt, the kind of shock that doesn't explode. It just lands, heavy, quiet. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I simply lifted my chin and let a thin, amused smile pull at the corner of my mouth. If he wanted a reaction, he'd have to settle for that. Before we go any deeper, tell me, you listening from where today there was a surprise, but not a pleasant one. About 95% of you are hearing this whole corporate disaster unfold and still haven't hit subscribe. Go on, tap it. It's free, and it guarantees you won't miss the part where this firing turns into something Darren very much regrets. Stick around, this story only gets better from here. Darren kept talking about innovation, agility, youthful energy, but his voice blurred into background noise. People shifted uncomfortably, waiting for me to defend myself. Some looked devastated. A few looked relieved. And I just observed, the way you watch a rookie pilot brag before realizing he's been reading the wrong instrument panel the entire flight, when Darren finally dismissed the meeting with a grand sweep of his hand. I nodded once, picked up my notebook, and walked toward the exit. My badge brushed the sensor. It beeped green. Of course it did. HR hadn't updated anything yet. A tiny administrative delay, harmless to him, priceless to me. No one noticed the small scanner embedded in the wall beside the door, but I knew it was there. So, with the same quiet calm people mistook for defeat, I let my fingers glide across it, just a casual gesture. Nothing more. A soft click confirmed the audit system had registered my departure. Darren didn't even look up. Why would he in his mind? He'd just erased a relic. He had no idea that the single, unconscious gesture I made on my way out had already started pulling on a thread he didn't even know existed, one that would unravel everything he thought he controlled. I walked back to my office with the kind of quiet that feels almost rehearsed. The numb calm that settles in when the shock has stopped ringing but hasn't finished sinking. My hands moved on their own as I pulled my box from beneath the desk, placing my things inside with a slow, steady rhythm. A few framed photos, a notebook full of old plans, the chipped mug everyone joked I'd never replace, 15 years reduced to a cardboard square. People watched from their cubicles, eyes soft, voices lowered to a hush, as if speaking too loudly might shatter whatever was holding me together. I didn't blame them. I wasn't sure what I wanted either. As I walked past the glass wall of the operations wing, I caught Darren's voice carrying proudly across the floor. He was telling a cluster of eager listeners that the machine will run a lot faster now that we've cleared out the old weight. The comment slid under my ribs. Sharp, but strangely expected. I didn't flinch. I simply let out a soft exhale. The closest thing to a laugh I could manage. If only he understood how many nights that old weight stayed until 2 a.m. to keep his precious machine from catching fire. But I kept walking. Numb calm, first pain later. The memories rose in quiet waves as I moved from desk to desk, collecting the last pieces of my tenure. I remembered the early days, scraping together every dollar of my savings, pitching investors who thought the idea was too ambitious, building prototypes on a folding table while the heating barely worked. Back then I believed in building something meaningful, and I did. I just never attached my name to it loudly. When the company grew, I stepped back from the spotlight by choice, shifting into the operations role to keep the peace and keep the engine running. I slid my laptop into the box and reached for the badge clipped to my belt. It still glowed green from earlier, an unintentional reminder that HR hadn't caught up with Darren's theatrics. Before I could unclip it, my phone buzzed. A message banner lit the screen. Reviewing seed round transactions from the initial year. Can you verify? I stared for a breath. Then another. Of all moments, this was the one that made heat rise beneath my calm. Audit rarely moved this quickly. A slow smile formed as I typed back, "Oh," faster than I expected. I closed the message and continued packing, each movement steadier than last. Maybe the day had tried to bruise me. But something beneath the calm was beginning to shift, something quietly certain, something waiting for the right moment to speak. Observant viewers will notice something unusual here. What about you? The message from internal audit stayed on my screen longer than it should have. At first, I assumed it was a routine sweep, the kind triggered whenever a senior employee left abruptly, but the wording nagged at me. Reviewing seed round transactions from the initial year. That wasn't routine. That was deliberate. And the fact that they reached out the same morning I was fired added a thin thread of suspicion beneath my calm. Still, I took a slow breath and replied the way I always had, with patience, clarity, and the slightly amused restraint of someone who had been through far worse storms. Then I opened the secure portal and uploaded the verification they asked for: scans of my old bank records, the ones showing the transfers I made in the company's very first months. I hadn't looked at those numbers in years. 75% of the seed money, my entire savings at the time. It felt distant, almost like reading the diary of someone I used to be, as the files processed. A part of me quietly wondered how Darren would react if he ever stumbled across those records. He'd probably sneeze, delete them, and call it decluttering. But audit wasn't Darren. Audit dug into anything that didn't add up, especially when a CEO removed someone flagged in the system as high-level clearance with financial notes attached. A soft chime sounded. The portal updated. Status anomaly detected. I leaned back in my chair, letting the words settle. Anomalies weren't good or bad, they were simply unexpected. And unexpected was where truths tended to crawl out. Minutes passed. Then a second notification appeared. Role marker identified: primary capital provider. For a moment, the room went still around me. That title had vanished from my employee profile more than a decade ago when I stepped away from the founding team and into operations. I had assumed it was archived, buried, absorbed into some merger of internal systems, but apparently not erased. Just sleeping. I felt a slow tightening in my chest, not fear, not excitement, something in between. Something like recognition. Another message arrived, this time from a senior auditor I'd worked with years ago. We found something unusual in the physical archives, pulling it now. I waited, each second layering onto the next. Then the file arrived. A scanned ledger sheet from 2009, yellowed edges, faded ink, the kind of record everyone believed had been lost when the office flooded nearly 8 years ago. But there it was, my handwriting, my initials, the original capital breakdown for month 1, and printed clearly on the right column: founding capital Benson Cole, 75% contribution. I stared at it in silence, the truth unfolding one clean line at a time. Not anger, not triumph, just clarity. Something long buried had surfaced, and the first piece of the puzzle had just clicked into place. If you think you understand, the next paragraph will change your mind. The anomaly alert reached the board long before it reached me. I didn't see the message itself, of course, but I heard about it within minutes, because nothing stirs panic in a corporate hierarchy faster than the phrase "founding equity discrepancy detected." According to the system, the alert was triggered automatically when the audit tool matched my verification files with the old capital records. And just like that, a quiet red flag began blinking across every board member's dashboard, politely suggesting that someone, somewhere, had made an expensive mistake. I kept my phone face down on the table, pretending not to care as notifications lined up like impatient customers. The truth was, I felt an odd calm cold, measured, controlled, the kind of calm that comes from watching a storm roll in and recognizing it as one you planted years ago. Not out of spite, but out of structure. Meanwhile, across the building, Darren Locke finally smelled smoke. Witnesses later told me he moved faster in those few minutes than he had in his entire tenure. He apparently marched into the IT wing and demanded they shut down all audit logs immediately. A cute request. Really, it may fold under pressure sometimes, but automated compliance logs do not. Every command Darren issued, every shortcut he attempted, every frantic override he tried, the system recorded it neatly, stamped it, and forwarded it to the audit trail he was desperately trying to bury. I returned a few calls, ignored others, and kept my voice steady as if this were simply an afternoon inconvenience. Then one number appeared that I couldn't ignore, a senior board member, one who rarely contacted anyone directly. I answered on the third ring. "Benson," he said, in a calm, almost curious tone. "Did you ever invest in the company back in the early days?" His question was so gentle it almost made me laugh. Instead, I let out a slow breath and replied with the driest honesty I possessed. Only 75% of the starting capital. There was a brief silence, then a chuckle. A real chuckle. The kind someone makes when they think you're joking but hope you're not. That's quite a number, he said. It was quite a time. I answered. He promised to call back once he reviewed the alert details. I ended the call and stared at the wall for a moment, wondering how quickly disbelief would turn into something sharper. It didn't take long. 5 minutes later. The same board member received the automated audit packet, the seed round transactions, the ledger from 2009, the system's confirmation that the primary capital provider had been misclassified for over a decade. His laughter, I was told, stopped instantly, and somewhere across the building, Darren sensed the shift too the moment he realized the storm wasn't approaching anymore. It was already inside the walls. Smart viewers will stay for this part because it changes the whole story. The financial report arrived in my inbox with the kind of sterile precision only audit departments can achieve, time-stamped, encrypted, and labeled Preliminary Findings, Seed Round Reconstruction. I opened it slowly, almost lazily, because some part of me already knew what I was about to see. Still. The first page managed to tighten something inside my chest, my name listed beside line after line of early capital entries, each one confirming that I hadn't just contributed to the company's beginning, I had funded it. 75%, every transfer, every deposit, every painfully scraped together dollar from those years when I lived off instant noodles and cheap coffee. It was all there, neatly itemized, glowing with the kind of clarity Darren wished he could Photoshop out of existence. I scrolled further, and that's where the tension sharpened. The board had finally caught up with the part of the story they never knew 5 years ago. During a major corporate restructure, the previous CEO had accidentally overwritten several founding designations, mine included. A simple data entry error buried under too many new systems and too many rushed updates. My equity flag had been archived instead of migrated, mislabeled as inactive designation. And no one, not even me, noticed for most companies. That might have been the end of it. But legally, money speaks louder than metadata. Founding capital beats every internal document. No signature, title, or fancy reorganization chart outranks the original financial backbone, and my backbone, apparently, accounted for most of the early skeleton. As I read, my amusement grew. Not loudly, just a quiet, sharp-edged humor, the kind that comes from watching someone insist the earth is flat while standing next to a globe. Meanwhile, Darren was reportedly scrambling, trying to contextualize the findings, trying to clarify historical anomalies, trying, in essence, to rearrange the furniture on a ship that was already underwater, unfortunately for him. The state banking records couldn't be reinterpreted, repainted, or politely asked to go away. They were permanent, federally preserved, and brutally impartial. I imagined him explaining that reality to the board. I imagined the dawning horror on his face when he realized that no corporate buzzword could outmaneuver a bank statement. And strangely, beneath the rising tension, a thread of satisfaction pulled through the moment, not vindictive, just accurate, like watching a compass finally point north after years of someone insisting it was broken. Then it happened. A new notification blinked at the top of my dashboard: compliance update, role classification adjusted. I clicked it, and there it was, simple, clean, impossible to argue with, co-founder verified, a title I hadn't seen in 10 years, a title that should never have disappeared in the first place, a title that now resurfaced with the full weight of the company's compliance system behind it. For a long moment, I just stared at the screen, not shocked, not triumphant, just quietly aware that a truth long buried had pushed its way back into daylight, and the company was no longer able to pretend otherwise. The revelation wasn't loud, but it landed with the undeniable force of something finally, irrevocably exposed. The legal fallout began faster than even I expected. One moment, the audit results were circulating quietly among the board. The next, my phone lit up with a stream of urgent notifications. Emergency board session scheduled. Governance alert issued. Immediate review required. When a company calls an emergency meeting at midday, it's never about a scheduling mishap. It's about survival. I wasn't in the building, of course. I was sitting in a small cafe across the street, a place with worn wooden tables and terrible music choices, but a perfect view of the corporate tower I had helped build. I stirred my coffee slowly, letting the bitterness settle on my tongue as the board assembled several floors above me. Whatever was happening up there, it had the unmistakable weight of truth finally crashing through a wall someone tried very hard to paint over. The first real update came from a source I trusted, an operations director who had always paid attention when others didn't. They're reviewing the compliance flag. She wrote, "Apparently Darren may have violated a state-level corporate bylaw." I raised an eyebrow. Not surprised, merely intrigued. Violating a bylaw wasn't unheard of. Violating that bylaw, however, the one that explicitly prohibits removing a verified co-founder without a majority board vote, was something else entirely. That wasn't a misstep. It was negligence wrapped in arrogance, according to company law. Firing a co-founder without formal procedure exposes the business to lawsuits that can easily reach 8 figures, tens of millions, all because Darren wanted to flex his new era leadership in front of an audience. The board must have realized this quickly, because the next notification buzzed through my phone like a whispered accusation. Board inquiry, governance breach under review. Darren had created a legal time bomb and lit the fuse with his own hand, and now the explosion was echoing down every hallway he once strutted through. I imagined the scene upstairs, Darren trying to rationalize his actions, insisting he didn't know, waving his hands, spinning jargon. But ignorance is not a defense against corporate law. Not at this level, not with this much liability. And the board wasn't composed of people who tolerated amateur mistakes, especially ones that endangered their own financial interests. Another message appeared, this time from a board member whose number I hadn't seen in years. "We're evaluating next steps," it read. Even through the text, I could sense the gravity pulling the truth downward, exposing each layer of Darren's error. There is a particular feeling when justice isn't emotional, but structural, when the rules you once built rise to correct the people who thought they could rewrite them. Then the final message came. This one from the board's legal counsel, Mr. Cole. "We request your temporary return to stabilize the company and prevent further damage from the CEO's actions." I read it twice, letting the irony settle in. Fired at 8:43, summoned back by 1:15. Legal consequences have a way of restoring balance, and in Darren's case, the balance was now collapsing squarely on top of him. If you really look deeply, you will realize it. The call from the board's legal counsel wasn't the end of the story. It was only the hinge. Everything truly shifted when the board concluded its emergency review and sent the official notice to every senior executive. I received my copy while standing outside the cafe. The early afternoon sun reflecting off the glass of the tower I once walked into every morning without a second thought. The message was short, formal, and quietly devastating in its simplicity. Benson Cole is a verified co-founder under state corporate law. No drama, no explanation, just the truth placed neatly back where it belonged. A strange warmth spread through my chest as I read it. Not pride exactly, but something steadier, like a pulse returning after too long under ice. I had spent years stepping back, giving space, avoiding attention, and yet here it was. The role I had buried resurfacing through a system no one could manipulate. The board had followed the audit trail, reviewed the old records, and reached the only conclusion possible. My status had never been erased, only misplaced. The next message came seconds later, a separate legal update outlining the implications. Under the state's founding capital reinstatement statute, all equity originally tied to my contribution must automatically reactivate. That meant the 75% stake that had been incorrectly archived during the restructure was now restored in full. No vote required, no negotiation, no Darren in sight, just cold, indifferent law doing what it always does when left alone, correcting the errors of overconfident men inside the building. I imagined the reaction as the shareholder dashboard refreshed, numbers shifting, colors changing, my name rising back to the top of the ownership chart, and somewhere in that room, Darren watching the screen as 75% of the company slid out of his reach like sand through open fingers. For someone who loved control, it must have felt like the floor beneath him simply vanished. Then came the twist. I didn't expect to enjoy as much as I did an automated system-wide email from the shareholder portal. No one wrote it manually, no one added flair. It was just a default message triggered whenever founding status was updated, but its timing made it feel almost theatrical. "Welcome back. Co-founder Benson Cole. Simple, direct, utterly lethal." Employees across the building saw the notification pop up, Phones buzzed, inboxes chimed, and Darren, reportedly standing near the boardroom screen, read the line aloud before his voice cracked. I pictured him blinking, trying to understand how the man he fired 8 hours earlier was now the majority owner of the company he claimed to modernize. I slipped my phone into my pocket and let a slow, sharp smile form. Not triumphant, not cruel, just honest. Power doesn't always roar when it returns. Sometimes it walks back in through an automated email, taps you on the shoulder, and reminds everyone who built the ground they're standing on. A casual viewer won't see the connection to the previous video, so there's no need to watch it again. Walking back into the boardroom felt strangely familiar, as if the years I'd spent stepping away had folded into a single moment waiting for me to return. The double doors swung open, and for the first time in a long time, the room fell completely silent. Not out of fear, out of recognition. I walked to my seat with the steady composure of someone who no longer needed to prove anything. 75% ownership has a way of clarifying your place in the room. Darren was already there, pale around the edges, his hands twisted together like he was trying to wring confidence out of thin air. When he saw me, he forced a smile that trembled just enough to betray him. "Benson," he began, voice cracking slightly. "Perhaps we misunderstood each other." I sat down slowly, letting the chair settle beneath me before meeting his eyes. "Oh, yes," I said, my tone calm and almost kind. "You misunderstood a great many things. The words didn't have to be sharp. The truth carried its own weight." Darren swallowed hard, and several board members shifted in their seats. They weren't looking at him anymore. Their attention had realigned quietly, naturally back to the person who had built the company's foundation long before flashy slogans and performance presentations arrived. The chairwoman cleared her throat and brought the discussion back to order. Procedure mattered, even when the outcome was obvious, given the governance breach and recent findings. She announced, "The board will proceed with a confidence vote regarding the current CEO." A tension-laced pause filled the air. Then she looked at me. "Mr. Cole, as the majority shareholder, we begin with your vote. I vote no confidence," I said simply. "No anger, no drama, just the inevitable being spoken aloud." She turned to the others. The board member who had once openly disliked me, someone who used to dismiss my operational decisions a decade ago, raised his hand first. "No confidence," he said, without hesitation. I studied him for a second, surprised not by the vote, but by the acceptance beneath it. Time has a way of revealing who pays attention to the truth, even when they pretend not to. 2 more hands followed, 12% combined, enough to seal the decision completely. The chairwoman recorded the result and closed her binder with a decisive snap. "Effective immediately," she declared. "Darren Locke is removed from the position of CEO." For a moment, no one moved. The room existed in a suspended breath, the kind that follows a storm finally losing its strength. Darren leaned back slowly, as if the announcement had knocked the air out of him. His eyes drifted toward the floor, unable to land anywhere that made sense. I stood, smoothing the edge of my sleeve. No victory speech, no gloating, just the quiet restoration of what had always been mine. And the room, for once, felt exactly right. The boardroom emptied slowly after the vote, leaving only a few of us behind, those responsible for handling the aftermath. Darren sat slumped in his chair, staring at the polished table as though it might explain how everything had slipped through his fingers. I watched him for a moment, quietly, letting the room settle into its new alignment. There was no rush. Power returned differently for everyone, for me. It came back with a calmness I hadn't felt in years. I pulled up the digital record on the screen, the clip of Darren firing me earlier that morning. His voice echoed through the speakers. Confident and dismissive, Benson Cole is no longer aligned with the new generation. The memory was still fresh, the sting long gone, but the arrogance preserved perfectly in high resolution. Darren flinched when he heard it, his shoulders tightening as if he could hide from his own words. I paused the video and stepped forward, placing the termination form in front of me. "Funny thing about generations," I said, my tone light, almost conversational. "They change fast." He looked up, his expression a mixture of disbelief and dread. He must have known what was coming, but knowing doesn't soften the blow. I signed my name in one clean motion. Then I spoke the same sentence he'd used to humiliate me, letting it fall into the room with deliberate, almost surgical precision. "You're no longer aligned with the new generation." The silence that followed felt familiar, eerily similar to the moment he fired me. The same hush, the same stillness. Only the roles had shifted, this time. The quiet didn't belong to shock, it belonged to clarity. No one questioned it, no one argued. Everyone in the room understood this wasn't revenge. It wasn't a spectacle or a personal victory lap. It was simply the system correcting itself. Darren swallowed hard and tried to straighten in his chair. I'll need details on my severance package, he muttered, clinging to the last thread of corporate ritual. The head of HR hesitated before responding. There is no exit package, she said. The compliance system marked you as having violated executive employment procedure. That disqualifies you from severance. For a second, Darren didn't register the words. When he did, his face drained completely. No severance, he repeated, as if corporate law were something negotiable, something that could be charmed or intimidated into bending. I watched him absorb the reality, slow, painful, unavoidable. The rules he had ignored were now the same rules, stripping every privilege he thought he deserved. I gathered the papers and closed the folder. No flourish, no dramatic exit, just the final, orderly step of a process he initiated himself. As I turned to leave, I allowed myself one last, quiet thought. Some endings don't need to shout. They simply land exactly where they were always meant to. Walking back into the building the next morning felt nothing like triumph and everything like return. Not a parade, not a declaration, just the quiet satisfaction of stepping into a space that had once rejected me and now stood open. Almost humbled by the truth. I didn't need an announcement. The shareholder records had already spoken for me. Verified co-founder, 75% owner, those titles carried themselves. I took the elevator to the executive floor, not to reclaim a throne, but to rebuild the structure around it, when the board offered me Darren's chair. I shook my head with an ease that surprised even me. Find someone qualified, I said. Someone who understands the company as more than a stage. I meant it. I'd spent too many years holding everything together to believe ego made good leadership. So I chose the role that suited me best, strategic advisor, the person behind the curtain who knew where the foundation was poured and how the beams were set. Word of my return had already spread. As I walked the hall, the same employees who watched my public dismissal now rose from their desks, one by one. A ripple of applause moved across the open floor, soft at first, then gathering strength. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was respectful, like people acknowledging something restored, something long overdue. I nodded back at them, offering small smiles as I passed. Their faces carried something I hadn't seen in a long time. Relief, hope. Funny how presence works. Yesterday, my silence made me look expendable. Today, it made people stand. Inside my new office, my old office. Technically, I settled into the chair and let the moment breathe. I wasn't angry anymore. The sting of being dismissed had dissolved into something steadier, a quiet self-respect that felt stronger than any retaliation. I looked at my reflection in the dark window and thought, almost amused. Sometimes my silence is what scares them the most. My phone buzzed with news alerts before I could finish the thought. Headlines from every major outlet lit up the screen at once. CEO removed after firing the majority owner. Leadership shakeup sends shock through the industry. Founder returns after botched termination. And the best one, the one that made me actually laugh under my breath, CEO fired for accidentally firing the company's owner. The markets reacted faster than the journalists. The company's stock jumped almost 8% in the first hour, climbing higher as investors realized the truth. Someone who actually understood the company's bones was back. Not in anger, not to seize power, but to stabilize what he once built with both hands. I leaned back in my chair, letting the calm settle, not victory, not revenge, just alignment, things returning to where they should have been all along. Quiet wins last the longest, and this one felt like it had been waiting for me.